Iowa, the Hawkeye State, or as some know it, the place where the tall corn grows. But there is another side of Iowa, a part often not seen and only heard about in bits and pieces, woven together through campfire stories, passed down through generations, and adding to the mystery and lore of what some would call paranormal. The supernatural, disrupted spirits, stories of ghosts and hauntings, cryptids, UFO sightings, and alien encounters. Stories of the unexplained and unimaginable, but stories that nonetheless simply exist and lurk in the shadows of the 29th state. This is Iowa Shadow Files. Hello, welcome to Iowa Shadow Files, Season 1, Episode 5. I'm Dan, your host and Iowa Paranormal Storyteller, and today we dive into the story of the Villisca Axe Murders, one of the most famous cold cases and serial killings in the United States. And just to put it in perspective for you, the murders took place back in 1912. And this was right around the time of the sinking of the Titanic. And it was the only story that seemed to take away the headlines from the sinking ship over the previous 2 months, leading up to the killings, which took place on June 9th or 10th. Now, I say this because the murders were reported to have taken place sometime in the night, so it could have been late on June 9th or early in the morning on June 10th. And it wasn't just some killing that grabbed the headlines, but it was one of the most violent, gruesome, and bloodiest murders because it was an axe murder, killing 6 members of the Moore family, which were 2 parents, Josiah and Sarah, with their 4 children, Herman, who was age 11, Mary Catherine, who was age 10, Arthur Boyd, who was age 7, and Paul Vernon, who was age 5, along with 2 of their friends who were staying overnight, which would be Ina May, who was 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, age 12, giving a grand total of 8 victims tallied from the gruesome slayings. And to make matters even more grisly is the fact that the murder weapon of choice, like I said before, was the family's own axe. See, I was shocked to really learn how common this could be during the time period, being that every family seemed to have an axe as a ready tool to use for chopping wood. And with a tool such as an axe always available, it makes sense now for a common available murder weapon to be available. But we go beyond just true crime on this story and we point to something else. The actual house, known as the Villisca Axe Murder House, and the paranormal activity that haunts it to this day. In fact, probably one of the most haunted places in Iowa. Let's get into the story. So the story goes that the Moore family were active members at the Presbyterian church in town, and Sarah had led a children's program ending at 9:30 p.m. on the night of June 9th, 1912, and left the church for home. Naturally, the kids invited their friends, the Stillingers, for a sleepover, and that was the last anyone saw the Moores or the Stillingers alive. The next morning, the neighbor, Mary Peckham, went to the house to check on the family. She was worried because she hadn't seen anyone out doing their chores, which was a full family of 6 would be very peculiar indeed. No noises coming from the house, no work being done around the house, no kids playing or causing the kind of sounds that only kids can make, whether child play or fighting or any other normal active noise. Instead, the house was silent. And this raised Mary Peckham's self-alarm. Something was off, so she went and knocked on the door. With no answer, she then let the chickens out and proceeded to call Josiah Moore's brother, Ross Moore, to please come check on the family because she knew something wasn't right. Ross showed up with a key, unlocked the front door, not knowing what he was soon to discover. The first bodies he found were Ina and Lena Stillinger, both dead on the bed, their heads bludgeoned. He immediately called down to Mrs. Peckham to call the authorities, which led local peace officer Hank Horton to arrive shortly on the scene. Horton examined the rest of the house and found the remaining bloodbath. The entire Moore family, along with the Stillingers, and a bloody axe left behind, belonging to Josiah, which was found eerily resting in the guest room. Investigators concluded that the murder happened in the night, found evidence in the barn near a knothole where they believed that the killer spied on the family. Later, they discovered 2 cigarette butts in the attic, where authorities believed that the murderer eventually snuck into the home while the family was out of the house and waited for the family to return from church and kill them while they were sleeping. And it wasn't just the fact that this gruesome serial killing had occurred in the once peaceful, quiet town of Villisca, Iowa. It's that over 100 years later, the case remains a cold case, unsolved. But there is more to this story. The Killings and Serial Killer Cold Case is a gruesome one in Iowa history, but it's the sounds and sightings of ghosts that lead people to believe that the Axe Murder House is haunted by the ghosts of the Moores and Stillingers. More on Villisca right after this. Hey there, Dan here with Iowa Shadow Files. First off, I want to thank you for following along. We look at our Shadow Files channel and podcast as a community of listeners, followers, and participants. And what I mean by participants is that we don't pretend to know everything about the paranormal. We just bring the stories of some of the most fascinating paranormal stories in Iowa into the light. And for this to happen, we love hearing from listeners like yourself. Maybe you've had an encounter or an experience and you'd like to share your story. We'd love to hear about it, and you can reach us at iowashadowfiles@gmail.com. That's iowashadowfiles@gmail.com. We know it's not always easy sharing some of these stories, and we'd like to make it clear we're not paranormal investigators or ghost hunters or experts on cryptozoology or aliens or UFO sightings, but we are journalists and podcasters that want to tell the story, the full story. We'll respect your privacy and the sensitivity surrounding the topic. If you have that story and you're wanting to just get it off your chest or even share with us at Iowa Shadow Files, we'd love to hear from you. But for now, let's get back to the story. Now, I will stop here and just warn everyone listening that this is very violent in nature, and the evidence and facts line up in a bloody fashion. So if it's inappropriate for a listener, consider skipping ahead. So the story of the Villisca Axe murders is gruesome. They were so bad that the bodies were unrecognizable. Josiah was the first victim, receiving more blows than any of the others, being hit so many times that his eyes were gone. And above the bed, marks can be seen in the ceiling where the blade of the axe had left marks, giving evidence that the blunt end of the axe had been used. Then there was Sarah, where the blade of the axe apparently was used. The only victim where the blade was used. Not really sure why, but it could have been due to the blunt end being a bloody mess. Who knows on that, but Sarah was also unrecognizable from the neck up. The murderer moved swiftly to its next victims, the children. First was Herman, then Mary Catherine, followed by Arthur and Paul. And just when you thought it was over, the killer was reported in the investigation, whoever returned back to the parents' room one more time to give more blows. Then the killer moved downstairs and killed Ina and Lena. So there's the question that enters my mind when reading the events of the murder. How in the world did the killer do this so silently? You would think that the killing would be loud, especially in a small farmhouse where surely the sound traveled. Surely not everyone slept through the noises of the bloodbath going on throughout the house. Killing one, maybe two, could be done. But you would have thought by that time the alarms of something evil going on in the house would have been sounded. And somehow, some way, someone would have surely been woken. A scream? A yell or cry for help, the axe hitting the ceiling during the slayings of both Josiah and Sarah Moore in their room? No, nothing. And so the killer moves from room to room, walking down the hallway, down the stairs, killing one by one, not even waking the kids sleeping next to their siblings being slaughtered in the night. My question is simple. How did the killer do this with such stealth? And the mystery behind the oddity of the killings doesn't stop there. The killer, whoever it was, returned to each body and proceeded to cover them with articles of clothing, sheets, blankets, whatever they could find. And it wasn't only the bodies. They also proceeded to cover every mirror in the house and the telephone. The telephone? This is strange indeed. Why? Theories persist. Maybe they were feeling guilty and didn't want to see the bodies. Maybe they could see themselves in the mirrors and didn't want to see the sick individual looking back. Maybe. But nobody really knows. Investigators believe that everyone was asleep during the murders except for Lena, who apparently fought back because she was lying crosswise on the bed with defensive wounds on her arm, apparently using it to protect from the fatal blows that would follow. She had been turned on her stomach and her pants removed, possibly molested, but with no evidence of this. Theories have presented itself that this might have occurred, but again, absolutely no evidence that there had been any sexual activity except for the removal of her pants, and the body being repositioned is odd indeed. But if things couldn't get more odd, we are left with this really odd detail. A 4-pound slab of bacon was removed from the icebox and laid next to the axe. The food and water on the table downstairs was left untouched, and then the killer proceeded to wash themselves in the washing basin, leaving behind the bloody water as evidence. Now, in small-town Iowa, stories travel fast, almost like a wildfire, and an axe murder, especially a mass murder of 8 in Little Villisca, would gather the masses, and it did. Before too long, the locals began to converge on the property, and the murder scene was completely contaminated. Over 100 of locals began to touch the murder weapon, handling the axe. It was even reported that some had taken pieces of Josiah's skull as a memento, as a collector's item. And questions are brought up. How could this happen? How could a murder crime scene be left for a small town to completely destroy and contaminate? Could someone have stepped in and stopped these rural town people from stampeding the house and contaminating all the evidence? Years later, the murder remains unsolved. But the house itself, which offers overnight stays, is considered one of the most haunted places in the U.S. Stories of apparitions, noises, doors opening and closing, footsteps, camera crews, catching strange lights in the home, orbs, researchers combing over these tapes to see faces in their footage. Paranormal investigators have stayed numerous times, and here are some of the stories. A closet door opening and closing. A shadow figure the size of a young child standing in the doorway. Voices coming from different parts of the house, one saying the word kill. A children's rubber ball moving by itself on the floor. And here's the thing. The Villisca house is famous. It's been on just about every paranormal channel and ghost hunting show out there. And this podcast is no exception. In fact, I thought this was a great place to start with some of the haunting stories, simply because Iowa is home to one of the most notorious ones. And the true crime mystery surrounding it adds to its fascinating story. It's been on Ghost Adventures, Scariest Places on Earth, shared on podcasts like Lore and My Favorite Murder, and many more. And we can read story after story and encounter after encounter, and some of them can be rebutted. And just the mind playing tricks on people, pranksters, tapping on windows at night, knowing that people are staying overnight, already spooked, and so it provides a funny prank for the local kids. Moving balls on the floor, some say that the floor is uneven, and it really just falls on the fact that people are looking for something, wanting to see something, and so their minds fill the gaps. People stating they have orbs and photographs or other strange lights and shadow can easily be tricks of the camera lens, bad lighting, a whole host of other things. But, and I come back to this and I say, but, is the Villisca Axe Murder House haunted? More after this. Dan here with Iowa Shadow Files. We want to encourage you, if you haven't already, to follow along. You can follow us wherever you listen to your latest podcast, whether that's Spotify, Apple, or a whole host of others. And if you would be so kind to give us a great review, that would help us even more. We'd love to hear from you. You can give us a shout out or ask a question. Maybe tell us a story of an experience you've had. You can reach us at iowashadowfiles@gmail.com. That's iowashadowfiles@gmail.com. Now, let's get back to the story. So before the mass murder, Villisca was relatively a quiet town. Just a small rural Iowa town going about its everyday business, church on Sunday, work on Monday, going through Friday and the weekend, on to Saturday, and again and again. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing crazy or wicked or even sinister in appeal. Just a regular old Iowa town. But it's funny how quickly things can change when your town is at the heart of one of the most horrific serial killings or crimes of the century. But we asked the question before the break. Is the Villisca Axe Murder House haunted? Some say that it's just a bunch of people infatuated with a good ghost story, while others have their own experiences. One story was shared with Iowa Shadow Files that you can reserve rooms for the night for those who are brave enough to stay overnight, and it's one of those reserved nights where a story was shared, that upon entering the home for the night, there was an overwhelming feeling of sadness in the house. They couldn't pinpoint what it was, but there was definitely some kind of energy. And after touring around the home for a bit, they could feel their shirt being tugged a few times. They had experienced numerous cold spots throughout the home, and even though it was a very hot day, both outside and within the house. The other stories come from a man by the name of Johnny Hauser. Johnny was recognized as the resident paranormal investigator and had been investigating the house for over 15 years, until strange things began to occur in his own house, and shutting a door on the investigation to shut down whatever strange thing or maybe even a spirit that made its way to his home instead. But he had other stories that got our attention, and one of them was about a time when he was investigating the house alone and could hear footsteps on the floor above him. All in all, he believed that the house is just messing with people, almost like the house takes on a life of its own. He could use different ghost hunting equipment, and that equipment would give him a different name while asking who is in the house. And the strange thing, those names that would be given were often linked as former suspects of the crime. Another time he was staying at night doing investigation work and was staying upstairs in the children's room. As he positioned himself in the closet, he could hear footsteps downstairs and moving towards the stairs and up the stairs towards the room that he was in. Startled, he thought someone had broken into the house. Preparing himself to take on the intruder, he waited. The intruder grew closer and closer until it was right outside the door, where quickly Johnny kicked down the door to take on the intruder, only to find that nobody was there. Other accounts talk about EVP capturing young children and oftentimes picking up Ina and Lena and picking up another word during their time, such as leave or death and us. There's a person here. And one word that came through loud and clear: get out. The use of these tools and getting these words for ghost huntings and paranormal investigations often center around electronic devices such as EVP, and even though it's just a pseudoscience, it still gains a lot of traction and something that is actually working. And then there was the strangest story of all surrounding the hauntings. A group of friends from Rylander, Wisconsin came down to stay overnight to do a paranormal investigation. When one of the visitors, Robert Stephen Larson, wandered off on his own away from the rest of the group, who apparently had gathered outside of the house to check on some things, leaving Robert alone in the northwest bedroom, when suddenly the group heard cries of help from Robert over their two-way radios. And this is where the story takes on a shocking twist. The team ran back into the house, ran up the stairs to check on their friend, only to find him stabbed in the chest. Apparently a self-inflicted wound, but the eerie part of the story, it was determined that Robert's wound was inflicted at about 12:45 a.m., which is about the same time that the axe murders took place back in 1912. Was it really something that happened to Robert? Or was it a self-inflicted wound? What about ghosts? Are there really ghosts wandering through the house? We'll definitely have more episodes on the Villisca Axe Murder House in future episodes, especially knowing that we can visit and tour the house, as well as book an overnight stay in the house. That might be an interesting future episode. We'll kind of write that down. But for now, as we wrap up this episode, we're going to try something a little different here. We're going to do a twofer, which is basically something that we're going to try Friday of this coming week, where we're going to give you 2 episodes instead of 1. We know that we have a lot to cover, probably more than we have time for. And so we thought, well, let's try 2 in a week and see how that goes. So Wednesdays are typically when we launch our episodes. We'll try Friday as well. And this coming Friday, we're going to dive into the background story of one of Iowa's college campuses. And it might be a little lesser known because it's not going to be one of the major state universities. So not Iowa, not Iowa State, not Northern Iowa. No, instead, we're going to take a trip over to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and dive deeper into the story of Coe College and the hauntings that occur there, most notably the ghost of Helen Roberts. So, until this coming Friday, we know that there are more places, more stories, more questions, but we also know the truth is still out there. This is Iowa Shadowfly.